Are you surprised?
I'd be honest, yes. Like that's a lot. That is a lot.
Well, let me talk about something else, but it's nevertheless related. I was involved in 1995 for a few months in the run up to the Dayton Accords that was supposed to end the Bosnian Civil War. This was a civil war between Croats, who were Roman Catholics, Serbs, who were Orthodox Christians, and Bosniaks, who were Muslims. Now, at the time, there was a lot of enthusiasm for forcing the repatriation of people back into areas where they used to live that were now occupied entirely by the people that drove them out. In other words, push Muslims back into areas where they used to live after they had been driven out by the Serbs or the Croats. Push Croats back into areas where they used to live when they have been driven out by Serbs and Muslims, and put Serbs back into areas where they used to live, where the Croats and the Muslims lived. Now, this went on and on. This was all in the name of, everything from equality to diversity to God knows what else. This had to happen. Wouldn't work. Too much blood has been spilled. That was the answer that I gave, and that was the answer that ultimately was accepted. Ambassador Holbrooke understood that and literally had to tell the Europeans, who were the advocates for this sort of thing, that's unrealistic. It can't be achieved. We came up with a settlement that wasn't perfect, but it has worked to some extent, and it ended the bloodshed at the time and has suppressed most of the violence since then. What you're dealing with in Iran right now, and you've got to understand this, are a lot of people who are victims of this war, people who have lost family members in this war. A lot of blood has been spilled, a lot of infrastructure has been destroyed. It will take a long time for this country to recover from what it has just been through. In other words, the population, the nation, is traumatized. You had similar conditions that existed in the aftermath of the Second World War, expecting everything to sort of be set aside in favor of goodness, understanding, and fair treatment to everyone is not realistic. Iran is not going to open its doors and welcome anybody that has worked tirelessly to destroy Iran with open arms. Now, I think that some of these things, as you point out, are probably excessive, not by Iranian standards, but by your standards, my standards. But nevertheless, we're going to end up in a situation that is very close to what exists today in the Dardanelles. I think that's where we're headed. The difference is that one side of the strait will be controlled by Iran, the other side will be controlled by Oman. Not surprising. That makes sense. Let's say that Bulgaria had controlled the European side of the Bosporus, then control would have been shared between the Turks and Bulgaria. But that wasn't the case. The Turks controlled the entire stretch. And they signed the convention in 1926, I think, the Montreux Convention, and they've controlled it and managed it very effectively ever since. I think we will see something similar with Iran. And I think whatever the initial fees are, they will be adjusted over time. But right now, you have people in the government who are angry, who are striking back in their minds in defense of their country. And they're saying, damn it, these people that have done so much damage to us, not just in this war, but in the years leading up to it. You got to go back to the Iran Iraq War and remember that, because all of the Sunni Arab states were pouring money into Saddam Hussein, as we were, by the way, and equipping Saddam Hussein in the hope that he would march into Iran and destroy the Khomeiniist revolution, which at the time we were comparing, believe it or not, to the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, you've got to go back and understand the past if you're going to appreciate the present. So this is not a new phenomenon for them. They look across the Gulf and they see all of these enemies from the border of Iraq all the way down to the border with Oman. And they're not terribly inclined to compromise and be friends with these people. These people are going to have to pay for what they've done. That's the mentality. We, of course, forget it. We're not even in the picture. We're not part of the negotiation. And unless we're willing to go back to the MOU, and I don't see any evidence at this point that we are, we will have no say whatsoever of any kind in anything. Everything will be decided by Iran in the Gulf, and probably with the urging support, whatever the word is, that encourages some degree of moderation from Moscow and Beijing, and to some extent also from New Delhi. These are great powers, and they will urge and have urged from the very beginning restraint, and they'll urge the Iranians to be more moderate in their demands. There's no question about that. Very few other people are going to have a voice whatsoever in what happens in the Persian Gulf. So I think we'll just have to be patient. We'll have to watch carefully how this develops. I think over time it will develop more positively. But the world is not going to return to normalcy. There's no chance for the Middle East to look the way it did, a year ago in another 5 or 10 years. That's not going to happen. The world has changed, period. And we, most of all, are out.
My worry is that I've always thought the war is over because it just doesn't. It just failed. It doesn't work, and there's a lot of reasons to walk away, and there's not many reasons to continue the war. And I also thought the Iranians would demand a lot because they won the war, but within reason. If these reports are true, where they charge if my math is correct, 0.01 all the way to 7% is like 700 times more than what is charged in the Dardanelles, assuming my math is correct, so people can fact check me on this. But it's definitely more than any other straits by far. And they're putting rules and restrictions on who can pass and when. That is essentially first charging an exorbitant fee. And number two is weaponizing the straits, because what I was expecting is Iran will charge a fee, a relatively reasonable one, maybe above reason, to make up for the reparations. And then there'll be freedom of navigation, and that will be the end of it. Maybe there'll be restrictions on the US military. But I did it for them to pass a law saying we will control who goes in and out, and no country will be able to use it unless they pay reparations and promise not to attack us or these other groups in these different countries. That just flips the entire freedom of navigation world, the new world order after World War II, upside down. And I worry that now they're essentially intentionally or unintentionally forcing Trump back into the war, assuming these reports are true.
Well, two things to consider. The first part is that World War II did not result in the sort of paradise like environment that you're suggesting. The Soviet Union and China were very much on the outside. They did not participate in any of the arrangements or agreements that were reached at Bretton Woods, the IMF, the World Bank, and so forth. So they stood aside. This was not a global solution by any means. And the situation around the world remained very, very tense for a long time, particularly in Central Europe, where you had the largest buildup of military power in the history of mankind. We all sat there with our guns fully loaded, pointed at each other. And we did that for almost 50 years. So I don't think you can go back to World War II and say that once it ended, we all sort of slapped each other on the back and said, well, that's okay. Now we'll get on with things. Also, remember that we're primarily a maritime and aerospace power. When we expressed an interest in freedom of navigation, even though we've never signed the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, we've never signed it. You ought to keep that in mind. So we talk about freedom of navigation. Well, we haven't signed it, so do we really believe in it? We believe in it for us.
Why didn't we sign it?
Well, because
Why didn't the US sign it? Sorry.
Yeah, we saw ourselves emerging from the war ultimately as not completely global, but certainly close to being a global hegemon. In other words, no ship could move, no aircraft could move without us ultimately having an influence over it. What did we want to sign a convention in the UN for that would restrict us in any way? So we run these so-called freedom of navigation cruises up and down the South China Sea, which for the most part are provocations against China. All right? They're not freedom of navigation operations as popularly noted. So I guess let's just set aside this notion that everything was better afterwards and things should be good now. It's not true. Again, you got a lot of blood that's being spilled, a lot of territories exchanged hands in the Bosnian War and also at the end of World War II. And we're still dealing with that in Ukraine. Now, if you look at the Middle East today and you understand that, what, 500 to 750,000 casualties in the war that Iran fought against Iraq after Iraq invaded Iran at with our encouragement and at the urgent plea of the Europeans, and we tried to snuff out this Khomeiniist revolution, which we equated with Bolshevism in 1918. You take that into consideration, the people that are going to sail through without probably any cost or at all for some period of time will be Russia, China, India, Japan, and I expect ultimately Korea. All of those countries have no hostile intent towards Iran, never did. In fact, they've offered their aid and assistance. They've sent in aid wherever they could beyond just military assistance. So I don't think that's surprising. Now, what about the rest of the world? Well, they're going to watch very carefully what happens on the west side of the Gulf right now. And remember, as far as they're concerned, the UAE in particular and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, these places have been nothing but launch pads for U.S. military power to either contain or attack Iran. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're not treated very equitably for some period of time. Now, how long will that last? An awful lot depends on what sort of arrangements are made. My point, and this is an important one, is I don't see where we play a role anymore. See, the truth is, right now, we are staring strategic defeat in the eye in the Persian Gulf. Let there be no mistake about it. We have been militarily defeated. We are being forced into ignominious retreat from the region. Once it became clear to the Iranians that Iran would survive, they turned their attention to the number two objective after survival, which was and still is the expulsion of hostile American forces from the region. Now, that doesn't sit terribly well with some of our friends in the statelets of the Persian Gulf, but we've demonstrated we can't protect them, and they've reminded us of that. And they're going to face a situation very shortly where there's one of two things has to happen. Either throw the Americans out, or we'll finish the job, and there won't be much of you left. And I think that's where the Iranians are at this point. We have to also heed the wishes of the people that live in the region. And I think ultimately people in the region are going to say, we've had a good relationship, but it's no good anymore. You really can't protect us, and you're going to have to leave. And I think those are the preconditions for some sort of peace in the region. Now, there's a problem here, and that problem is Israel.
Israel.